Hello and welcome to Frontrunner Motorsport. And today we had the Brazilian Grand Prix, which I have watched and we are now going to discuss. And there is actually quite a lot to discuss. A lot of contact was made between people at this race. And there was a lot more overtaking than other Grand Prix that have happened this year, especially Mexico. So to start with, I will say that the Brazilian Grand Prix was a good race. It was very entertaining. Even the sprint race wasn't that bad, although I still think they're entirely pointless. I think we'll start with qualifying, because that was where the excitement started. It was a bit damp, and so the track got quicker and quicker. Nothing too surprising about Q1 and Q2. Magnussen did a very good job getting to Q3 in the Haas, but the best was yet to come. And it was, I think, getting a bit damper. I think the rain was starting again in Q3. And so we had the first few minutes where people were setting times. Magnussen was quickest. And then George Russell crashed and brought out the red flags. And by the time they cleared his car, it was raining heavier and no one could set a quicker lap time. So Kevin Magnussen, for the first time in his career, got pole position, which is a fantastic achievement regardless of how it happened. Very, very happy for him and Haas. I believe it's Haas's first pole, so it's a pretty incredible result for them. I'm sure that was enough reason to celebrate. The sprint race itself, now Magnussen, he did drop back to 8th. And I think that was always going to happen in normal conditions. But Verstappen, or Red Bull, decided to go for medium tyres, and that turned out to be the wrong choice. And it meant George Russell, sort of recovering from the day before, managed to get his head down, and he took the sprint race win ahead of Carlos Sainz and Lewis Hamilton. Sainz was then given a penalty for changing his engine, so he had, for the first time this year, an all-Mercedes front row. And now the race was dry. I don't think there's any real threat of rain. I think they mentioned dark clouds at some point, but it didn't rain. It started pretty badly for Kevin Magnussen. He's really hit all the highs and lows of this weekend. And he got turned around by Daniel Ricciardo. And they then made contact again. And both cars were out, and we got a safety car. 100% Daniel Ricciardo's fault. I don't think anyone would say otherwise. And it was a messy attempt at an overtake. But disappointing for both drivers and McLaren. So in their fight with Alpine, it was a bit of a hit. But I think Daniel Ricciardo's on his way out, and he's racing for pleasure, so it will hurt him most of all because he's got very few laps in a Formula 1 car left. So this, that cut his time much shorter, in fact almost by half. So we got a safety car, and then the race restarted, and Verstappen made a move on Hamilton, and once again they both collided for the 4th or 5th time in the last 2 years. Very, very harsh to give Verstappen a penalty for this one. I think, in my opinion, it was a racing incident, because Verstappen was alongside him at the corner. Actually, at the first corner, he was ahead. It's just the nature of that first corner into Lagos. It's kind of 2 corners. So whilst he was ahead at the first, I think Hamilton has sort of managed to crawl ahead at the second apex, if that makes sense. Now, Hamilton didn't give Verstappen any room, but Verstappen could have backed off, and they made contact. It hurt both their races, Verstappen most of all. And I think very unfair to give Verstappen a penalty for that. There wasn't much else he could have done other than drive over the grass, I guess. But I think it was definitely a racing incident. It shouldn't have been penalised. It was 2 cars in the same place at the same time. It's what you want from racing. And what I will say about Interlagos is it was much better on the overtake front. We did still get a lot of DRS overtakes down the straight, but there was some in the middle of the track as well. Especially Carlos Sainz, who pulled off some great overtakes in this race. And Leclerc as well, and the reason Leclerc had to make a lot of overtakes was he was punted round by Lando Norris. Again, this was definitely the McLaren's fault. He got in the curbs, ran into Leclerc. Leclerc was very lucky to keep it going, but he at least managed it, which was very, very lucky, because he did hit the barrier, and I think he got away with minimal damage. So we had those two incidents, and Verstappen and Leclerc, they dropped right down to the back of the field, and Hamilton made a few overtakes in the midfield. I think Ocon and Vettel, the usual suspects. And the race kind of normalised a bit after that. We had George Russell out in front, controlling things very nicely, Perez and Sainz and Hamilton, and things sort of just carried on. There was a lot of pit stops, it felt like, in this race. I felt like some cars were in 3 or 4 times. I think Sainz pitted 3 times. Maybe it was only twice. I think it was definitely 3. But he was out of sync because he had an issue with his rear brakes. I think it was a visor tear or something. It got caught in the rear brake duct and it overheated. So he had to come in a bit earlier to get that taken out, or risk bursting into flames. So nothing they could do with that, and it put him out of sync. So that wasn't Ferrari or Sainz's fault. It's just one of those things. And if that hadn't happened, I think he'd have been a real contender for at least second place. But it wasn't a bad result for Sainz. One incident I forgot to talk about from the sprint race was Ocon and Alonso making contact, which was, in fact, they made contact twice, and I think in both incidents you can both say actually they're both pretty dumb, but given that Alonso's leaving, and from what I hear, Alonso and Ocon don't like each other very much anyway, which I'm not entirely sure why. If you know why, tell me, because I can't remember if something happened between them or not, but this did not, make inter-team relations any better. It was a very, very messy sprint race for Alpine, and they were very lucky to get points out of this, and McLaren to not get points, because Norris didn't finish either. It could have been a lot better for Alpine, I think. So it was Norris breaking down, brought out the second safety car with about 15 or so laps. Safety car was out for a while, and at the restart, Russell was being chased by Hamilton, who had Sainz and Perez behind him, and Leclerc. Leclerc did a fantastic job, although I think he was lucky with a safety car. I think that helped him a lot. He managed to drag himself past Perez as well as Sainz, and Ferrari got 4th and 5th, and they're very lucky to get that, I think, given that both their cars had various issues during this race. In fact, they haven't had a clean weekend for a long time, and this was at least they both got to the end in the points. It was probably as good as it was going to be. 3rd and 4th, not 5th. So at least they beat both the Red Bulls, but they're not clear of Mercedes in the Constructors' race yet, and Mercedes seems to have overtaken them on pace, which is very interesting. And I believe in the Constructors there's only 19 points between Mercedes and Ferrari. So I think if they both finished at Abu Dhabi, they'll be alright. But Mercedes are right on their tail. And Mercedes took all the points bar 1 this weekend, because not only did George Russell win, Lewis Hamilton second, George Russell also got fastest lap and finished first in the sprint race, whilst Hamilton finished 3rd. So if Hamilton had finished 2nd in the sprint race, Mercedes would have got maximum points. And so as it is, they only lost 1 point, which is pretty good going. Last part of the race really was Hamilton trying to close down Russell. He couldn't do it. He didn't get close. Russell pulled out the second gap before the DRS was reactivated, and then he managed it, and he was even pulling away from Hamilton towards the end. So George Russell is a Formula 1 winner at last, and I think he really deserves it. He has been driving fantastically all year. It's sort of dropped off for him a little bit towards the end, but I think especially early on this year he did an amazing job, especially with the Mercedes not being competitive at the start of the year. Russell was, he's been in the top 5 for most of the year. I think there's only a couple of incidents that have kept him out of that, so to take a win, pretty incredible. For Lewis Hamilton, he's got one more chance, and even Do you know, even if that incident with Verstappen hadn't happened, I don't think he'd have caught Russell. I think Russell was managing the pace very, very well. And after the safety car, he clearly showed that he had the pace to at least match Hamilton, and if not, be faster than him. So, entirely deserved by George Russell. Mercedes taking their first win of the year at the 21st race is pretty shocking. And can we do it again in Abu Dhabi? They do seem to have the pace to do it. I don't know if... I mean, Red Bull need Perez to get decent points to get second in the championship. So they're going to have to at least try, as will Ferrari. So I think Abu Dhabi could be tight. It's going to be interesting to see who comes out on top in that one next weekend. So as for the championship, obviously Verstappen is still champion. But the fight for second, Leclerc and Perez, they are both on 290 points. So it is neck and neck. So that is going to be the most interesting aspect of the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. I believe George Russell can still catch them. I think he has to win and get fastest lap, and both of them need to not finish. But if that happens, George Russell will be second in the championship. Very, very unlikely. So I think Lewis Hamilton can catch George Russell as well. But I think Lewis Hamilton has to win and get fastest lap, and George Russell, I think if he finishes 10th, he might lose out on countback, and if he doesn't finish, he'll lose out on points, but he only has to finish 9th to definitely finish ahead of his teammate, if that makes sense. And then Lewis Hamilton and Carlos Sainz is only 5 points between them, so that's the second big fight for 5th in the championship. Beyond that, Norris is pretty much safe in 7th. Ocon and Alonso are pretty close together, so there's a fight for 8th and 9th, whilst Bottas is pretty secure in 10th. And then there's a few battles for minor places. In the Constructors, Red Bull have already run, obviously. As I said, Ferrari are only 19 points ahead of Mercedes, so that's to play for. And it's going to be interesting to see if Ferrari can hang on. I think it'd be really, really bad for them to lose second place in the Constructors after having such a good year. But the problem with Ferrari, the difference between them and Red Bull and Mercedes, Red Bull have 3 actual DNFs this year. Mercedes have 2. Ferrari have 9. And when you think there's 9 times a Ferrari hasn't scored points because it's retired, mostly through reliability as well, although obviously there has been crashes, that is shockingly bad. Only Alfa Romeo have more DNFs. I think they have 10. So Ferrari, if you want to improve next year, that's where you need to do it. That is shockingly bad. They would have secured second in the Constructors' Championship if they could just finish races. And that is a real problem they need to look at. Beyond that, Alpine can still catch McLaren, although I think McLaren have enough in terms... Because Alpine, unless something happens to the 6 cars that are actually capable of winning a race, then Alpine, I mean, realistically, their best they're going to get is 5th or 6th. Yeah, I don't think that's enough to overhaul McLaren, but they still have a reason to try. Behind them, I think Aston Martin and Alfa Romeo can swap, and again, the lower places, there's probably teams close together. There isn't a whole lot to fight for at Abu Dhabi, and it's still... It's 22nd race of the year at a circuit I've never really liked. I don't have high hopes for this one. Next week's video might be a thank God it's over kind of video. But there was still a lot of excitement from this race. I did really enjoy Brazil. I love the Interlagos track. And honestly, this was, off the top of my head, probably the best race this year. There may have been others, but I can't remember. I'd actually have to look at them and go, oh yeah, I remember that now. But yeah, this was definitely a very good race. A lot happened. There's some intrigue. It's a shame there isn't a championship fight still going on, but we still have battles here and there. And there is still strategy involved. I'm sure there's going to be fighting about Leclerc wanting to get past Sainz to help in his battle for second in the championship. That's a pretty scummy move. Verstappen didn't let Perez back past. Pretty scummy move. So it's going to be interesting to see if there's any fallout from those incidents as well. But honestly, this was a good weekend for Formula 1. So make sure you subscribe to the channel. There's a lot of really good content coming up because the year's almost finished. I've got so many plans, I'm not even going to tell you. Just subscribe and there's going to be some great videos. That's all I'm going to say. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Tell me what you thought of the Brazilian Grand Prix. Thank you for watching and have a good one.